The frost had barely settled on the forest floor when a tiny, trembling bobcat kitten emerged from beneath a snow-dusted log, its stubby tail flicking like a nervous semaphore. Around it, the forest seemed to hold its breath, branches creaking under the weight of ice, a distant crow's call echoing through the frozen silence. The kitten's wide, amber eyes scanned the world with fearless curiosity, unaware that something, or someone, was watching from the shadows, waiting for the smallest hint of trust. If you enjoyed watching this little frozen bobcat's adventure, consider subscribing and joining us on more heartwarming wildlife journeys. Your support means the world, and I'd love to share many more moments like this with you. The forests of northern Montana stretched like an endless white canvas, a frozen labyrinth of pines, firs, and spruce trees. Each branch bowed low beneath heavy layers of snow. The early morning light glinted off the icy needles, scattering diamonds across the forest floor. Every step into this winter world carried the crunch of frozen snow, a brittle echo that seemed to travel for miles in the otherwise perfect silence. Evan, a 55-year-old nature photographer, lay motionless beneath a camouflage tarp, his long lens extended before him like a natural extension of the frozen ground. He had been waiting for weeks to capture the elusive snowshoe hare in its winter coat, a creature that blended seamlessly into the blinding white of the forest floor. But today, something entirely unexpected was about to shatter his meticulously planned day. Evan's face, lined with age and experience, was partially hidden by the frost that had accumulated on his beard overnight. His breath rose in small, visible clouds, mingling with the mist of the early morning, and every exhalation reminded him of the freezing temperatures he endured daily for the love of his craft. For decades, Evan had learned to become part of the landscape, to move like the wind, to breathe like the trees, to vanish like a shadow when a wild animal passed nearby. But even the most skilled human camouflage could never fully erase the loneliness that had taken root in him since the loss of his partner 2 years prior. The forest that once offered solace now echoed back only the hollow sound of absence. The snow-covered expanse around him was breathtaking. The long shadows of trees stretched like frozen fingers over the snow, and patches of sunlight made the ice crystals glimmer like a constellation fallen to earth. A distant woodpecker hammered at a trunk with steady, hypnotic precision, and the occasional call of a raven punctuated the silence like a punctuation mark in an otherwise wordless poem. Even the wind, cold and cutting, moved with an almost reverent caution through the forest. For Evan, this stillness had once been a sanctuary. Now, it was merely a mirror of his own solitude. He had been on this morning stakeout for hours, lying on his stomach, camera poised, lens glinting slightly under the weak winter sunlight. He had expected nothing more than another quiet, lonely session. Then, out of the corner of his eye, a tiny movement caught his attention. A flicker, barely perceptible against the white and gray landscape, made his heart skip. At first, he thought it was the snowshoe hare he had been stalking. But the movement was too deliberate, too confident for such a timid creature. Slowly, cautiously, he turned his head. Through a small break in the snow-laden branches emerged a tiny bobcat kitten, no larger than a loaf of bread. Its stubby tail twitched with what seemed like purpose, its ears were tipped with little tufts, and its pale, spotted coat blended into the surrounding snow with almost magical precision. But what truly struck Evan was not the kitten's appearance, but its condition. Its fur was stiff with frost, and its tiny body shivered violently with each delicate step. Clearly, it had been exposed to the cold for longer than it could safely endure. Evan's breath caught in his throat, a pang of both alarm and awe racing through him. The kitten's eyes, bright and icy blue, reflected the pale sunlight, wide with fear and curiosity. Every part of Evan's training told him to stay still, to let the animal pass, to observe and not interfere. But the kitten's frozen condition pulled at something deeper within him. Slowly, deliberately, Evan eased his hand back to his backpack, careful not to make any sudden movements. He pulled out a small strip of venison jerky, the only food he had brought, and held it out in a gloved hand. The kitten paused, nose twitching, ears rotating like radar dishes. It stepped forward hesitantly, one tiny paw breaking the crusted snow at a time, until it was close enough to sniff the offered treat. Then, in an almost imperceptible motion, it sneezed, a tiny, sharp little puff of frosty air that sent a sprinkling of ice crystals into the air. Evan couldn't help but chuckle softly, the sound muffled by his scarf. The kitten, undeterred, gingerly took the jerky in its tiny teeth. Its movements were delicate, almost ceremonial, as if it knew it had claimed a precious prize. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, it scampered off into the forest, disappearing behind a ridge of snow-covered boulders. Evan sat frozen for a moment, heart hammering in his chest, marveling at the absurdity and beauty of what had just occurred. A part of him wanted to chase after it, to ensure its safety, but he stayed in place. The forest, the snow, the stillness, they had granted him a moment of pure, unscripted magic, and he wanted to savor it. Evan whispered to the empty forest, "You're a fi—" The next morning, the forest was still cloaked in frost. The sun had barely crested the distant mountain ridges when Evan returned to his spot by the frozen creek, the snow crunching softly beneath his boots. He moved slowly, deliberately, mindful of every step. Even though the bitter cold bit through his layers of wool and down, his mind was warmed by a single hope, the tiny frozen kitten he had saved yesterday. The forest was quiet, almost expectant, as if it, too, was holding its breath. Evan's camera was slung across his shoulder, though he barely glanced at it. The snowshoe hare he had been tracking could wait. Today was not about the photograph. It was about the fragile pulse of life that had brushed against his hand only 24 hours earlier. He carried a small bundle of jerky, cut into tiny strips, placing them carefully in the pockets of his coat. It felt almost ceremonial, a humble offering to a creature far wilder than himself. Hours passed, and Evan sat like a statue beneath his tarp, eyes scanning the frost-laden underbrush. The pale light shifted, stretching the long shadows of the pines across the glimmering snow. A pair of chickadees flitted past, black feathers bright against white. A squirrel's tiny paws scraped the bark of a nearby spruce. Yet, there was no sign of the kitten. Evan's heartbeat began to slow, a quiet disappointment settling into his chest. Perhaps the blizzard had taken its toll. Perhaps it had wandered too far to return. He let out a slow breath, the cold air cutting through him, a reminder of the wilderness's indifference. Then, softly at first, almost imperceptibly, he heard the crunch of tiny paws in the snow. A faint rhythm, quick and deliberate, carried through the forest like a whisper. Evan's body tensed, senses sharpening, and he turned his head slowly. His breath caught. There it was, the frozen kitten, alive and alert, though still shivering slightly, moving with newfound confidence through the white expanse. Its stubby tail twitched like a metronome, each movement deliberate, purposeful. But it was not alone. Behind it came another, and another, and another. Within moments, 5 bobcat kittens emerged, tumbling and bounding through the snow, their small bodies coated with a delicate layer of frost. Their golden eyes gleamed with curiosity and mischief, reflecting the pale sunlight. The leader, the tiny kitten Evan had first encountered, strode ahead with a surprising authority, its stubby tail held high like a flag announcing victory. It was as if it had returned not just to reclaim food, but to introduce Evan to the entirety of its wild, chaotic world. Evan's hands shook slightly, part cold, part disbelief. His breath rose in clouds, catching on his scarf as he watched the kittens approach. One, clumsy and round-bellied, waddled straight toward his boots, its tiny claws making soft scratches against the leather. Another, sleek and nimble, pounced on a dangling strap from his camera bag, batting it as if it were the most thrilling toy imaginable. A third kitten leapt onto his snow-covered shoulder, placing a delicate paw against his cheek as though inspecting this human for worthiness. He could not have imagined a more absurd, magical scene. He reached into his coat pocket with extreme care, pulling out the tiny strips of jerky. The moment he opened the first piece, the forest erupted into motion. The kittens dove, pounced, and scrambled in a chaotic ballet of fur and claws. One slipped face first into a shallow snowdrift, emerging with its nose dusted in white powder, blinking furiously at the world. Another grabbed a strip, only to be intercepted mid-leap by its sibling in a blur of spotted fur. The leader, however, moved with quiet precision, taking its piece and retreating to a safe perch on a fallen log like a seasoned commander surveying its troops. And then Evan noticed her. The mother bobcat emerged that made every inch of him instinctively respectful. Her thick winter coat shimmered in the soft morning light, her amber eyes intelligent and calculating. She didn't approach. She didn't hiss. She simply watched, her gaze assessing this strange human who had dared to enter her world and offer sustenance to her offspring. There was a tension in the air, a silent understanding passing between predator and man. Evan was no threat, at least for now. Day after day, the rhythm repeated. Evan arrived in the quiet pre-dawn, carefully laying out his strips of jerky. The kittens appeared, led by the frost-bitten leader, bringing their chaotic energy into his life like a sudden, joyful storm. They tumbled through the snow, chased each other around fallen logs, and explored the folds of his coat and boots with unrestrained curiosity. He learned their personalities in exquisite detail, the boldness of the leader, the clumsiness of one, the endless energy of another. One, smaller and gentler than the rest, often sought comfort from him, curling into the crook of his arm as the snow drifted around them. Through it all, the mother bobcat observed from a distance, a regal sentinel. Evan learned to respect her space, to offer gestures of care without encroaching. There was a silent bond forming, delicate and fragile, a bridge between human and wild. Evan, who had spent years waiting in stillness for elusive animals, now found himself part of a living, moving story, one that had unfolded in the cold, quiet heart of the Montana winter. As the day wore on and the pale sun climbed higher, Evan felt a warmth spreading through his chest, unexpected, wild joy of trust. By the time Evan finally packed his gear, carefully brushing snow from the tarp and camera, the kittens had retreated into the forest, paws leaving tiny imprints in the pristine snow. The mother lingered a moment longer, amber eyes fixed on him, before vanishing into the trees. Evan's chest heaved in quiet awe. He had come to the forest seeking a fleeting photograph. Instead, he had witnessed something far rarer, the cautious, tentative beginnings of a bond between human and wild, fragile yet profound, unfolding in the frozen heart of Montana. By the third day, the forest seemed to have rewritten its rhythm around Evan and the bobcat kittens. Each morning, before the first light touched the frost-laden treetops, he would trudge carefully along the frozen creek, the crunch of snow beneath his boots mingling with the distant calls of ravens and chickadees. He no longer felt the loneliness that had weighed on him. Instead, a curious anticipation had taken root in his chest. He was eager to see the frozen kitten he had rescued, and now, the entire unpredictable, chaotic little family that had accompanied it into his life. Evan had learned to respect their rules. The mother, whom he quietly named Regal, always kept a watchful eye from a safe distance. She was a queen in her domain, and every gesture of Evan's had to be deliberate and respectful. There was no rush, no expectation, only patience, and the slow, careful building of trust. He began laying small strips of jerky near his tarp, arranging them thoughtfully, as if performing a ritual to welcome these fragile, wild visitors. The kittens, in turn, learned his habits, approaching with a mix of curiosity, caution, and growing familiarity. Frostbite, the first kitten he had encountered, led the charge each morning. Its stubby tail flicked like a tiny semaphore, signaling the troop behind it to follow. Dash, a wiry, hyperactive male, leapt from snowbank to snowbank, seemingly propelled by his own boundless energy. Willow, sleek and deliberate, padded softly through the snow, inspecting the terrain with a keen hunter's focus. Scout, the smallest of the group, often trailed behind, cautious and tentative, while Moxie, fearless and mischievous, launched herself at dangling straps and snow-laden branches with reckless joy. The chaos that unfolded around Evan was almost too much to take in. One kitten, clumsy and round-bellied, would trip over its own paws, sending up sprays of snow, while another would stolen mid-flight by a sibling. Frostbite would patiently observe, nibbling his prize with a quiet dignity, as if supervising the untrained antics of the rest of the brigade. Evan's camera, once aimed solely at distant, unapproachable wildlife, now captured moments of intimate hilarity. He filmed them wrestling over snow mounds, slipping and tumbling like tiny acrobats, and occasionally curling into the folds of his coat for warmth. Each kitten displayed a distinct personality, and Evan found himself learning and cataloging them as meticulously as he had studied elusive animals in remote corners of the world. It was during one quiet interlude, when Scout, shivering slightly from the residual frost of the night, curled up against Evan's side, that he truly understood the depth of this bond. The tiny kitten purred, a low, vibrating rumble that seemed almost impossibly loud for such a small creature. Its warmth seeped through his coat, a physical reminder that life persisted even in the harshest conditions. Evan closed his eyes for a brief moment, letting the forest's quiet, punctuated only by tiny squeaks and the rustle of snow, fill the emptiness in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt a profound sense of peace. The mother cat, Regal, continued to observe silently from a nearby ridge. Her amber eyes followed every motion of her kittens and Evan's careful hands. Sometimes, she would shift her stance, stretching elegantly, a silent reminder of her power and grace. Yet, her gaze softened slightly when she saw Evan gently hand a piece of jerky to the smallest kitten or carefully disentangle a tiny paw from a tangle of snow-laden branches. It was clear that she had begun to trust him, though on her own terms. Evan's days quickly became a dance of careful preparation and spontaneous chaos. He would arrive before dawn, laying the jerky and setting up a tripod with a small stage for tiny dramas, Frostbite leading a playful pounce, Dash bounding in endless circles, Willow calculating her next move with precision, Scout clinging shyly to Evan's side, and Moxie executing daring leaps like a miniature acrobat. Each day brought new discoveries, new quirks, new evidence that life thrived even in the harshest cold. One afternoon, as the pale sun cast long, golden streaks across the snow, Evan sat back against a pine, exhausted yet elated. The kittens had climbed his shoulders, pounced on his boots, and tumbled across his lap in a tangle of fur and frost. He laughed aloud, a deep, rolling sound that echoed through the quiet forest. It was a laugh that had not emerged in years, a laugh that carried the warmth of connection and joy. Even Regal, perched atop a ridge, tilted her head as if acknowledging that this human had earned a place in their frozen world. By now, Evan was more than a photographer. He was a caretaker, a participant in the wild rhythms of this small bobcat family. The kitten's antics had replaced the emptiness in his heart with laughter and wonder. Every playful squeak, every tumble into the snow, every trusting nuzzle from Scout was a balm to the quiet loneliness he had carried for years. As evening approached and the sky deepened to an icy lavender, Evan packed up his gear slowly, careful not to startle the kittens as they explored the final stretches of sunlight in the snow. Frostbite lingered a moment longer, forever changing the rhythm of his solitary life in the Montana wilderness. By mid-January, the Montana forest had fully embraced winter's dominion. The air was crisp and biting, snowdrifts rising in irregular waves across the frozen landscape. Evan trudged along the familiar path toward his photography site, each step leaving a deep imprint in the untouched snow. His camera hung heavily around his neck, yet he barely noticed it anymore. The forest was no longer a solitary stage for observation. It had become a theater of life, laughter, and unexpected companionship. Today, he sensed, something extraordinary was about to unfold. The first light filtered through frost-laden branches, casting elongated shadows over the snow. Evan paused, scanning the horizon. A soft crunching sound carried through the trees, the rhythmic, confident approach of paws far too small to belong to any wolf or coyote. His heart quickened. Frostbite was leading the charge once again. But as the figures emerged through the white haze, Evan froze in disbelief. This time, it wasn't just Frostbite and his siblings. The entire Bobcat family had arrived. 5 kittens tumbled through the snow with chaotic energy, and behind them, Regal, the mother, padded silently with a regal air, amber eyes assessing every inch of Evan's presence. The sight was almost surreal. Tiny paws left delicate tracks in the pristine snow, marking a path of life and vitality that contrasted sharply with the cold, silent forest. Frostbite trotted straight to Evan, stubby tail held high, and nudged his gloved hand with the urgency of a messenger delivering news of great importance. Dash and Moxie followed in a whirlwind of motion, leaping and tumbling over one another in gleeful chaos. Willow approached more cautiously, her movements precise and deliberate, while Scout, the smallest, pressed close to Evan's side, seeking the safety of warmth amidst the snow's harsh chill. Evan's breath caught in his throat. He had never witnessed such unbridled trust from a wild animal. The kittens treated him not as a stranger, but as a participant in their world, a giant, slow-moving, gentle playmate who had provided comfort when it was needed most. He knelt slowly, careful not to frighten them, and extended his hand. One by one, the kittens investigated him, sniffing, pawing, and even nuzzling his fingers. Frostbite, the bold leader, took his jerky piece first, trotting off a few paces to consume it with calm dignity, while Dash and Moxie launched into an improvised wrestling match over the remaining strips. The scene was chaotic yet harmonious, a perfect blend of wild instinct and developing trust. Evan laughed, a deep, rolling sound that seemed to resonate through the frozen forest. One kitten, Biscuit, the clumsy, round-bellied one, tumbled directly into his lap, paws flailing as he attempted to climb Evan's coat. Another, Willow, pounced onto the snow-laden log near his feet, eyes locked on a drifting snowflake, as if it were the most fascinating discovery in the world. The mother, Regal, watched silently from a short distance, her posture regal but calm, a sentinel ensuring her kitten's safety while granting tacit approval to the human interloper who had become part of their lives. For Evan, the scene was overwhelming. He had come to the forest seeking photographs, but what he had received was far more profound, a lesson in trust, patience, and the unspoken bonds that can form between human and wild. Each kitten, with its unique personality, displayed its affection and curiosity in ways both amusing and touching. Dash would leap into snowdrifts with reckless abandon, only to glance back at Evan as if seeking approval. Moxie, ever daring, would scamper across his shoulders, pawing at his scarf and eliciting a soft laugh. Scout pressed close, purring in a low, vibrating tone that reverberated against Evan's chest, a gentle reminder of the warmth of life amidst the cold. Regal, the mother, remained the silent guardian. Evan had learned to respect her space, to offer no sudden movements that could disrupt her vigilance. Yet today, as he observed her watching the kittens engage in their snowy antics, he sensed a rare moment of acknowledgement, a subtle nod, perhaps, that his presence was accepted. It was a delicate balance, a dance of mutual respect, and Evan felt deeply honored to be included. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, settling on the kitten's fur and Evan's coat, adding a layer of soft, crystalline beauty to the scene. The air was filled with the muffled crunch of paws, tiny mews, and Evan's gentle laughter. Each sound, each movement, was amplified in the quiet vastness of the snow-covered woods. It was a tableau of life at its purest, wild, untamed, yet filled with connection. Evan knelt in the snow, allowing the kittens to clamber over him freely. Frostbite nuzzled his shoulder, Dash batted at his gloves. Moxie explored his backpack, Willow inspected the lens cap dangling from the camera, and Scout curled into the crook of his arm, seeking warmth. He held them gently, careful not to interrupt their natural curiosity. For the first time in years, he felt the profound joy of being surrounded not by loneliness, but by living, breathing energy, chaotic yet comforting, wild yet intimately familiar. As the sun climbed higher, casting glittering rays across the snow, Evan realized the depth of what had unfolded. The frozen kitten that had stumbled into his life had returned not alone, but with its siblings and mother, transforming his solitary routine into a vibrant, living tapestry. He was no longer merely an observer of the wild. He was part of it. The forest, once cold and empty, now pulsed with life, laughter, and the subtle warmth of trust earned over time. That day, Evan understood something he had never before experienced, that love and connection could emerge in the most unexpected forms, even in a frozen wilderness, through the smallest of creatures. The kittens had given him more than companionship. They had restored hope, laughter, and the unshakable realization that life, in all its fragile beauty, could thrive even in the harshest conditions. As the afternoon waned and shadows stretched long across the sparkling snow, Evan packed up his gear slowly. The Bobcat family lingered, treading carefully through the pristine forest, leaving tiny paw prints as a testament to their presence. Regal's amber eyes met Evan's one last time before she disappeared into the treeline with her brood. He stood quietly in the snow, chest heaving, heart full. In that moment, surrounded by paw prints, soft mews, and the memory of a tiny frozen kitten's first trust, Evan felt completely and utterly speechless. Evan stood in the snow, surrounded by the entire Bobcat family, heart overflowing with a joy he hadn't felt in years. The frozen kitten he had rescued had returned, not alone, but with its siblings and mother, leaving him completely and utterly speechless.